Utah is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I had the honor of attending a public hearing in California with the gentleman to my right from California. It was an honor to listen to these people, and I am pleased to yield 5 minutes to the chairman of the subcommittee that worked through this bipartisan bill, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, in 2009 and again in 2010, hundreds of billions of gallons of contracted water were expropriated from California farms and instead dumped into the Pacific Ocean in the name of the Delta Smelt. This tragic policy fallowed hundreds of thousands of acres of some of the most fertile and productive farmland in America. It threw thousands of hard-working families into unemployment. It devastated communities throughout the region. And it created the spectacle of unemployed farm workers standing in food lines to receive carrots imported from China in a region that just a short time before had produced much of American-grown fruits and vegetables. And it contributed to rising grocery prices that families felt far beyond the congressionally created Dust Bowl of California's Central Valley. In the last Congress, the then minority Republicans begged and pleaded for hearings to address this catastrophe. The majority turned a deaf ear. Last year, we returned as the new House majority to take testimony on what could be done to correct this disaster. The result of those hearings is the bill by Mr. Nunes that this rule brings to the floor. This bill restores the water allocations established under the historic Bay Delta Accord in 1994. When that agreement, commanding broad bipartisan support, was signed, Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt assured all parties, and I quote, "A deal is a deal, and if it turns out that there's a need for additional water, it will come at the expense of the federal government." The water diversions shattered that promise. This bill redeems it. The Federal Central Valley Project is part of a coordinated operating agreement with the State Water Project at California's request and consent. The two are inseparable. In order to protect the water rights of every Californian, this bill brings the full force of federal law to protect those rights so that there is no ambiguity. This protection has earned this provision the support of the Northern California Water Association, representing the water districts that serve the farms and communities and families throughout the areas of origin in California. Now, the opponents have just said, well, this preempts state water rights. It doesn't preempt state water rights. It specifically invokes and protects state water rights against infringement by any bureaucracy, local, state, or federal, a legitimate constitutional function of the federal government established under the 14th Amendment and made essential by the terms of the state-approved joint operating agreement of these intertwined water systems. The bill also restores common sense and practicality to protections for endangered native species like salmon and the Delta smelt. You know, one of the greatest threats to these endangered native species is non-native invasive predators like the striped bass. Indeed, it is common to find striped bass in the Sacramento Delta gorged with endangered salmon smolts and Delta smelt. This bill allows open season on these predators, and it encourages the use of fish hatcheries to assure the perpetuation of thriving native populations of salmon and smelt. It replaces the cost-prohibitive provisions of the San Joaquin River Settlement Act, which contemplates spending an estimated $1 billion to achieve the stated goal of establishing a population of 500 salmon below the Freant Dam. That comes to $2 million per individual fish. This bill replaces the absurd mandate of a year-round cold water fishery on the Hot Valley floor with a warm water fishery that actually acts in concert with the habitat. It removes disincentives in current law that discourage groundwater banking in wet years. It allows the recycling of environmental flows by communities once they've achieved their environmental purpose. Mr. Speaker, the movement for stronger environmental protections began over legitimate concerns to protect our vital natural resources. But like many movements, as it succeeded in its legitimate ends, it also attracted a self-interested constituency that is driven far past the borders of common sense and into the realms of political extremism and outright plunder. This bill replaces the cost-prohibitive and unachievable dictates that caused so much human suffering in California with workable, affordable, and realistic measures based on real science and not what one federal judge rightly called the ideological zealotry of rogue bureaucrats. This debate will determine if we're about to enter a new era when common sense can be restored to our public policy and a sensible balance restored between environmental and human needs. I welcome that debate, and I ask for adoption of the rule to bring it forward. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Utah reserves. The gentleman from